Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. Today is July 29th, 2023, and this is a follow up video to some of the videos I've made in the past about SIP 1694 to go into a lot of detail about some current thinking of a minimum viable constitution and going beyond that to a final constitution, a 1.0 product by and for the community. Now, a prior video I just made talked a lot about Cardano, the open source project, and the governance layer, the execution layer, the management layer, the oversight and audit control of how great software is made. However, Cardano is getting a government. 1694 is the closest thing we have to it at the moment. Many people get the DREP side because DREPs, in essence, kind of look like a stake pool operator of a different name. Very similar mechanics. People register and delegate to it. But then there's this idea of a constitutional committee. They're elected to a term and they're constrained by the Constitution of Cardano to act as a check and balance. And actually, it's a tripartite government where there are three branches. So there's also the stake pool operators who come into play when the system is getting a major upgrade or there are some oversight mechanisms that need to come in if the other two houses are failing. So it's a very legitimate question, which is right here. What is the Constitution of Cardano? So one of the closest things we have to a founding document is this right here. So if you go to mycardano.com, I just realized I am not screen sharing, so I am going to do that for you guys. There we go. Here we go. So what is the Constitution of Cardano? And if you go to Why Cardano, this document I wrote back in 2016, and it was published in 2017, shortly before the network went live, and it kind of talked a bit about some things we care about: scalability and science and interoperability and regulation and all kinds of things. So that was the original. There is a social contract of these types of things, but Cardano's a lot bigger now, and it's not just an idea; it's a launch network with millions of people. And so the question is, how do you get to a good constitution for Cardano? So if you look at SIP 1694, one of the things that we've been exploring is how do we, because you have the DREP side, you have the Constitution side, and then you have the SPO side. So for these three things, how do you constrain behavior? So this is via liquid feedback. So very similar to the liquid democracy conversation. So if people don't like their DREPs, they just change their delegation preferences. And we have evidence through the SPO side of the pros and cons of that. These are elected, but follow rules. And those rules are established in some form of a constitution. And then these are also liquid feedback. But they follow kind of a different governance set. So this is very active. This is a little bit more passive. And then you have something that is rigid. So on the constitutional side, what we've been doing is we have a small working group. And what that small working group is doing is it's writing up what we call a MVC, minimum viable constitution. And the initial ratification of that is going to be the ratification of 1694. This doesn't contain big flowery language and rights and duties and responsibilities, but rather it contains just a collection of things that are required to convene an interim working group, interim constitutional committee, something to get started because you need to bootstrap a system. And then we have this idea of an MBO, intersect. And what will happen is that small working group at intersect will move over to a working group at intersect. Kind of a civics committee. And they will start a more open, because you can join it, discussion. And the idea of the discussion is to establish a baseline so that that could become an input to hosting somewhere between 100 to 200 workshops throughout the world. And it can provide all the funding necessary for those workshops. So this is an innovation that we learned from SIP 1694. However, it's a little different in that the workshops, each one will elect a delegate. And that delegate will then travel to a constitutional convention. Convention. And then they will draft and ratify version 1 of the Constitution. Then that will then be voted on by the SIP 1694 government. Then we're done. Okay, so there's the basic steps. So we have to bootstrap the system. You need some initial parameters. And what's super cool is we're adding something into the SIP where there's actually some smart contract logic that can represent the Constitution that constrains the Constitutional Committee members. So there's already this idea of an on-chain constitution that's machine understandable and enforced, some parts of it. So you start with a very minimum viable kernel. Small working group just instantiates that kernel. Larger working group comes together and it starts creating those established parameters to get workshops throughout the world done. The idea is we'd like 100 plus countries represented. So basically, super inclusive process, and it's not good enough just to be part of it. The most qualified person, according to those workshops, will be elected in each of them to create a delegate, and those delegates will all converge to one location for a period of time to have a constitutional convention. That constitutional convention will finalize and ratify a candidate constitution, and then that candidate constitution will basically get voted on. This will likely take the totality of 2024. Lot to do, a lot of moving pieces with it. And it's going to be an incredibly inclusive process because if you want to bring 100 countries together, it's a lot of work. And if you want to bring delegates, then there needs to be a group that has the capacity to help them get there. So pay for the plane ticket, pay for the hotel accommodations, maybe a little bit of a stipend, help with visas, and other considerations like that. The other cool thing is by having a working group, there's a lot of people. We've identified over 40 who are domain experts in writing constitutions. And what we can do is we can bring those domain experts in to serve as advisors on how to actually write one. And they can serve on a working group with members of the community who are interested in participating in this open process. And they can provide some of the preliminary training and knowledge necessary for the workshops to be effective. So it worked really well, 1694, where there was some initial stuff, it came together, and then went 50 plus workshops were done. But now we ask more of the workshop participants because they actually have to go to a constitutional committee, a convention, and create and ratify something. What's so inclusive about this is that the voting for ratification of the committee, the convention, will be one delegate, one vote. So, for example, if I was a delegate in this constitutional convention, I'd have the same vote as a delegate from, let's say, Ghana or Sierra Leone or Australia or New Zealand, wherever they come through. So there's a great degree of equality in all of this, and this really does allow a lot of diversity of thought and an opinion. Now, this is kind of a candidate process. And where I'd really love to hold a constitutional convention is I'd like to solve a historical problem. So in 1852, General Urquiza had a constitutional convention in Argentina in Santa Fe, little town in northwest of Buenos Aires. But Buenos Aires actually refused to participate in the Constitution of Argentina, so it was ratified without that city's participation in 1853. So I think it would be super cool because we haven't done a major event for the South American community to host the Constitutional Convention in Argentina sometime in 2024 and bring everybody there. Pretty easy visa situation for most people in the world, certainly easier than the United States. Buenos Aires is a wonderful city, and the Latin American community, South American community has been very vigilant about building a great constitution. And if we plan this for a while and have a great working group at Intersect, core members can put a lot of money into making it a very effective event. And then a lot of people, for the first time in their life, will be able to experience this amazing place. They all come in, and a lot of really heavy, amazing work can be done. The structure and form of that work will be kind of modeled and scoped here. And you have two levels of consent. You have a one delegate, one vote open process because the people who took the time, volunteered to come from around the world somewhere, get to vote on that. And then you have a ratification by the community as a whole through the DREP process. Once that's in place, what will happen is because we built this into 1694, the SIP, there's a model to replace the Constitution version 0 with a new version. So they just follow that, and that new version comes into place. One of the things that's been designed is to encode parts of that Constitution, smart contract, to constrain the behaviors of the Constitution Committee members. So when that new version comes in, it also is affiliated with some machine understandable logic that constrains their behavior. So you create that nice check and balance. Now, what's really cool is this process is reusable. So one of the things that can be done is you could create a living constitution, and every so often, maybe 5 or 10 years, you can go back through the whole process, have another constitutional convention, and update the Constitution to a new form that adds many more things, and see if the community wants to stay with the old government or the new government. So you have still the same mechanism of inclusion. These conventions can grow to hundreds of people, to thousands of people, and you have to use different systems to be able to sort all of that out. This is an awesome opportunity because if we did 50 and there was 1,000, if that scales and we get up to the 200 side, that'd be 4,000 people. It's pretty remarkable if you think about that. That participate in the workshops, and then of which 200 get sampled, and then they come on over and they participate and actually put some serious time and roll up their sleeves and decide. It's very egalitarian. It's not connected to a person's ownership of ADA. It's connected to the merit, the skill, and them convincing their local community that they're the most qualified person. And then obviously the community has an on-chain update system to go from the minimum viable constitution, which is the bootstrap, to one. So then there is a question of what ratifies the bootstrap. That's the ratification of the SIP 1694 altogether. So there'll be a special voting event this year, and anybody who holds ADA can vote to ratify, and they're ratifying the SIP and the initial version 0 of the minimum viable constitution. Puts the government in place, and then that government can then be used recursively to get to the next government. And this process is reusable for revisiting some of the foundational logic. And one of the work streams will be transitioning more and more and more of the Constitution into code. So that code literally does become law. Super cool. Also, is this an opportunity for people to learn a lot? There are people who have dedicated their entire lives to studying the legal construct of a constitution. And by having a civics committee at the Intersect those people can serve as advisors to not only help get this process bootstrapped, but also to attend the Constitutional Convention as either voting or non-voting members, depending upon the decisions the community makes, and act as advisors to help steer the process along and teach people. A lot's going to be asked of delegates. They have to travel, they have to think, they have to argue and represent what they think it should look like. And then our hope is it can converge. So this is a idea of how we should go about it. I think it's a really sensible structure. It includes a continent that has been, unfortunately, a little underloved and left out in the Cardano ecosystem, despite the fact that it has such a huge community. And also, it solves an old problem, an old injustice that Buenos Aires was left out of writing a constitution. It's about time that they get to write the constitution of a much larger digital nation, and they get to do it with the entire world. And it would be super cool to see all those pieces come together. So I just wanted to make a video to discuss a little bit about where do we get started and how do we go, SVE to Bootstrap and MVC. The MVC is just a very simple document because our hope is to encode a lot of it as a smart contract to basically just create some baseline rules for the Interim Constitutional Committee. It's not really meant to be a full constitution, but rather a launching pad that will enable a full constitution to be ratified. As you can clearly see, this particular process, it's set up in a way that would allow the willing across the entire world, my hope is more than 100 countries, to participate and actually travel somewhere, get to know each other, and create the most diverse gathering of people by culture, language, and ideology to get to a point where we get a version 1. And that version 1 then goes to be ratified by every single ADA holder through that bootstrap government. And then it moves over and becomes the law of the land for the digital nation that is Cardano. So I hope this answers some questions about that. The MVC will have some more specifics to release, but obviously you'll be able to read it and see it because it's part of the special voting event for 1694, and make a decision if you think that's good. Pretty cool stuff, huh?